Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Good afternoon, Mr. Gabriel. Good afternoon, Mr. Felix. Good afternoon, Amina.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good
All right, thank you
afternoon,
very
Mr.
much.
Hussein. Good
All right,
afternoon.
thank you, everyone. I'm trying to share my screen, and my other device is not connecting to the internet. So, ah, okay. Welcome to the week 3 of JIIPCC Mentorship and Internship Program on Artificial Intelligence and Technology. And this week's topic is bias in AI and its human rights implications. We are going to be having 3 mentors with us today, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Gabriel Udo, and Mr. Felix. I can see we have 2 of our mentors on the call, and our mentees' attendance is very, very poor. Amina kindly sent a reminder or call the group WhatsApp call for the AI class and let them know that we have started the call and remind everyone to join the call. Our network is very poor today. Why? Okay, so permit me to read our mentor's profile before we jump into the main topic for today. I'll be reading our mentor's profile. Can we all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I'll be reading our mentor's profile, but I won't be sharing the screen yet until my other device connects to the internet. So please bear with me. We have 3 mentors. I started earlier by introducing Mr. Kelly Idanhe, Mr. Gabriel Udo, and Mr. Felix Ologbonyo. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And our topic for today is bias in AI and its human rights implication. So let me just give us the profile of our 3 mentors, then we jump into the topic for today. I'll be giving the floor to our mentors afterwards. They have like 20 minutes to give us an overview on the topic for today. And afterwards, we'll also take our mentees' presentation, the question and answer session. So I'll start with Mr. Felix Ologbonyo. Is a senior manager with MTN Nigeria Africa. Foremost telecommunication and technology company. He provides strategic and bespoke legal solutions to the business across all its divisions, including subsidiaries. He equally sits on the panel of neutrals at the Lagos Multi-Door Courthouse, the first and foremost court-connected mediation center in Africa, where he has mediated over 120 cases. He was legal manager with Nestle Central, West and East Africa for almost 8 years, where he served as special legal advisor on antitrust, electronic commerce, data privacy and protection, and technology law. He holds a bachelor degree of law, manga cum laude from the University of Ilorin, a BL manga, I don't know what that means, magna cum laude from the Nigerian Law School. Advanced Certificate in Intellectual Property Management from World Intellectual Property Organization, World Intellectual Property Academy, Genevieve, and 2 master's degree in law from the University of Lagos, certificate in law and artificial intelligence from European University Institute, Italy, in addition to other professional qualifications. He currently serves as one of the members of the Committee on National Artificial Intelligence Policy set up by the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy to draft the Nigerian policy on artificial intelligence. Our second mentor for today, our profound mentor, is Mr. Gabriel Udo, currently a PhD candidate in autonomous weapon system and international humanitarian law at Europa Universitatea Gadrina, Frankfurt Oder. Gabriel is a researcher in AI law, policy, and ethics. His thesis analyzes ethical and legal implications of introducing autonomy into leather weapons systems. Previously, he won the DAA funding for his project Intelligent Weaponry Law and Ethics, and later joined the International AI for Earth Observation Lab in Munich as a Beyond Fellow, with a passion for exploring the intersection between technology and ethics law. His research spanned across a wide range of areas, including ethical, responsible users of AI, smart city technology, digital colonialism, privacy, comparative analysis in the application of technologies for human-friendly autonomous system. Gabriel is committed to designing technologies that prioritizes the need and well-being of humans. Additionally, he possesses an immediate level of proficiency in Python programming, allowing him to understand sophisticated software solutions to complex problems. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for our mentors on the call today, Mr. Gabriel, Mr. Felix, and we hope to have Mr. Kelly with us soon. Our last mentor for today is Mr. Kelly. Kelly Idehe is an emerging technology thought leader, entrepreneur, AI researcher, and influencer for digital innovations. He is passionate about the application and impact of disruptive technology for solving the real-life problems faced by people, especially in underdeveloped countries. He is currently founder of LearnHub.Africa and the CEO of Link Orion Technology, where he consults for brands and help them undergo the process of digital transformation. When not fully immersed in research, speaking, engagement, and technology-related projects, Kelly loves to spend his time on social impact projects, helping young people through digital skill programs, STEAM education, and mentorship as a commitment to his mission to getting more people read for a future that would be completely disrupted by technology. Thank you very much for all you do, Mr. Kelly. That's the profile of our mentor for today. Sorry, I couldn't share my screen today. I'm having a network issue with my other device. So I'll be giving the floor to, let's start with Mr. Felix. He's on the call. Kindly turn on your video. Right. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. So, I assume this afternoon, irrespective of where you are, please pardon me if it is not your place. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, loud and clear, sir.
Oh, okay, so I think I'm quite pleased to be here, and this will be my second time here. So it's quite a privilege. JIIPCC, thank you so much for the invitation. And to everyone who is here, I'm so pleased to be here also because we'll be discussing something quite important and a very emerging aspect of law and ethics. So today we are looking at biases and of AI and implication for human rights and how that affects human rights. So I'll just try to just speak maybe in a few minutes, maybe in 3 minutes, so that we can leave the remaining to the presentation, then begin to have some critique after the presentation so that I don't really go into more details on issues calls after the presentation. But basically, what we are looking forward to learning here today, and of course, I think I'll also be learning from the mentees, so it's going to be a win-win situation for all of us, is to look at how the application of AI has affected or potentially has effect on human rights, especially when it comes to the aspect of biases and discrimination. And I think we've had a lot of examples because it's given, okay, let's for example, the aspect of machine learning. So you've seen a situation where machine learning actually, because of data it processes or because of insufficient data, or how it has consistently worked in order to develop application of data, now by its operation, whether intentionally based on how it was programmed or by virtue of learning, give rise to biases or discrimination against set of people or against certain people of different sex, or let me say people of different orientation or even race or tribe. And looking at it, when you look at it, it's on the face of it. Let's, for example, say that you have a form of algorithm that is designed to represent for facial recognition. Maybe because of the continuous machine learning, it's now used to identify the faces of the Haitians, or let me say the whites as opposed to black, even though personally I don't like the use of those words. I really do not believe anybody is white, and I don't also believe that anybody is black. And personally, I also do not like the word people of color. I also believe it is still quite discriminatory. But let's allow those dictions for the purposes of this class. And so when such happens, it creates a form of bias. For example, we've seen places where when you wanted to get medical data, and because certain people spend more on their medical costs, and it gives a kind of inaccurate result when the survey was conducted by an AI device. And looking at it, it appears quite, maybe when you just check it, it may not be of high importance, but the implication is actually far-reaching. Why? Because such data will be used to make political and economic decisions. And when the political and economic decision is actually implemented, it's going to affect the people which are discriminated against in that survey. And that's going to lead to larger issue of discrimination, which even give rise to issue of violation of human rights, especially when it comes to being discriminated on any particular ground. If we look at the example of Nigerian constitution, discrimination on any basis is actually a fundamental violation of the fundamental human rights of citizens. And so this is what we are going to be looking at this afternoon, and of course, looking at how possible we can reduce this or address it and begin to address issues emanating from biases and discriminatory tendencies of AI. So I personally look forward to the presentation from the mentee so that we can do a lot of justice to this after the presentation and have a bit of critique. And again, look forward to how we can move from here. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Felix, for that brief introduction to the topic. Thank you very much for joining us for the second time, and we hope to see you on our other sessions in the future. Thank you very much. I'll be giving the floor to Mr. Gabriel to give us his own presentation, his overview on the topic.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Felix. I think I also learned one or two things from his very brief but compact conversation on the matter. Let me first apologize for my my absence last week. I actually thought I was going to attend, but just close to the time some things came up, I got so stuck in a lot of things that I couldn't make out the time to attend. And even today I'm having my first holiday in like 3 years, so but I thought I could just spare the next couple of hours. And once again, Mr. Felix, thank you. I've been looking out for especially Nigerians that are working in areas of AI policy, and sincerely, it's very I always feel very excited when I run into others who are doing this, because over here in Europe, the perception they have is that Africans are not really involved in these conversations, and they have these conversations at this level, hoping that at the end of the discussion they will just implement whatever decisions they come up with. Africa is going to scoop that, and then we'll just apply it. So many times I look out for people that are, especially that are home-based, that are back home in Africa, that also have this in-depth understanding of AI and the numerous implications it's going to have, especially for those of us in the global south. Thank you. Again, just like Mr. Felix said, I usually would prefer the presentations to come, and then the presenters would have the ample space to have their discussions. Then we could answer questions. But there are some very basic issues. I just spent the last 30 minutes, 1 hour trying to put up some vital issues that I feel may have been missed out in the presentations that were sent to me last night. First of all, we need to have this perception or this understanding that AI in itself is just a tool, right? There is no thinking computer. Now, this is the basic outline of every conversation we need to have about AI. Every other thing we say about artificial intelligence is built on that. Now, that determines what kind of regulations, what kind of policies, what kind of discussions generally we want to have about AI. So if we're going to talk about the issues of bias, we certainly have to look beyond the system, beyond the tool. If a machete, for instance, cuts down a wrong tree, you're not going to blame the machete. You're going to blame the human being that held the machete. Now, this leads us to the issue of bias, because the major question would be, how is it even possible to have a system that is not thinking independently, but with the capacity, unquote, the capacity to define people, based on their differences. Just like Mr. Felix, I don't like using the color thing. It doesn't really overall, it sounds really fun. So this is the question. And the simple answer is that there's a human being behind the system, behind the tool. And further into that, if you have, if a police officer holds a gun, he's going to shoot, for instance, he shoots someone. The decision to shoot someone will be based on his personality as a police officer. Whatever law backs him up, whatever mentality, whatever idea he has is going to be behind that decision. If an armed robber has a gun and shoots it, whatever backs him up is going to be his own mentality. Now, most of the types of biases we see in automated systems or in autonomous systems, take your idea back to the fact that there's always a human being behind the development of AI. So the issue of bias would not be from the system itself. It's going to mostly come from the person or the process of making the system. So for instance, we talked about process of data gathering or data gathering or data processing or training, machine learning. What kind of data has this system been trained with? If you use a particular type group of persons to train a system, or let me use a live instance. Last week or 2 weeks ago, a study from Stanford University showed that essays written by non-native English speakers have been flagged mostly as being written by artificial intelligence, which is wrong. So those systems that flag this were trained apparently with essays that are written by native English speakers. So now, even if the persons are trained, even if the persons that designed the system are not biased themselves, but the data that has been used to train this system, it's like training a child or training a dog. You can train a dog to bite every person that looks huge or that carries a tool, So these systems are trained. Sometimes it's the data that is the problem. Sometimes it's the way the systems are designed themselves, that they are not capable of filtering out the proper data and knowing what data to keep. Now, having said that, there are many types of biases, especially with AI. I could, from the top of my head, I could think, get up about 7 or 8. There's the selection bias, that talks about the training data itself. There's the algorithmic bias, there's the implicit bias. Implicit biases come from unconscious attitudes. People just have a particular attitude with themselves. There are people, for instance, that don't like a particular group of people. And in the way they design the systems, there's that implicit transfer of the biases they have, okay, into the system. This takes us back to the conversation I had earlier. If you have racist people build systems, they are most likely going to transfer racist ideas into those systems. But I could see some examples in the presentations that were sent. The last time we talked about the Google image identifier that misidentified Black people, unquote, as apes or as gorillas or whatever. So we have this kind of biases that are probably that are implicit from the people that designed it. We have confirmation biases. Confirmation biases just reinforce already existing bias in systems. Each time you use ChatGPT, you are further training it, right? So if each time you take an answer from the system and you accept that answer, you're retraining the system. Now, if there's a bias from the answer and you accept that bias, it means you've retrained indirectly that system. So you confirm the bias system. It further consolidates on the bias that the system already has. There's also the stereotyping bias that comes basically from stereotypes on certain groups. This could also be traced back to who designed the designs of the system or the data. There's also temporal bias, there's interaction bias. What kind of people is the system interacting with more? There's labeling biases. ChatGPT has a lot of this as an example, or even Midjourney. For those that have used Midjourney a lot. If you ask Midjourney to show you a rich man's house with a car, to paint a picture of a rich man's house with a car, it's going to be some European. But if you say show you a poor person, with his car, you're going to see somebody that looks like he's from Nigeria or something like that. So there's also the data bias and then the feedback loop bias, which is more like the confirmation bias. It's each time you give a feedback to the system, when you get information from ChatGPT, again, the very popular ChatGPT, it shows you some, to confirm whether you are okay with this answer. You give it the feedback. And that feedback, if the information that you've given feedback on was already biased, then you confirm that bias. So there are many types of it. And then now, of course, I'm sure we all understand the conceptualization of human rights generally, and then the numerous areas where automation or artificial intelligence is likely to cause some problems. We can look at as many of them as possible in healthcare, in criminal justice. Some time ago, we talked about risk assessment tools, that they could be used for racial profiling, or there are some algorithms that are used for sentencing. I know the US still has this, and there are studies that indicate that these things have certain biases in them. There are also issues with privacy, and so many of them that I'm sure will be discussed in the course of this conversation. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to listen to what the presentations are going to expose us to. Just like Mr. Felix said again, I'm also here to learn. I just needed to lay this background so that our conversations would go towards this direction. I've seen a couple of questions, and I'm sure we are going to handle them at the end of the presentation. So thank you, and let's hear from the presenters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gabriel. Thank you very much, Mr. Felix. And I can't see our third mentor on the call yet. So hopefully he will join us soon. That's Mr. Kelly. He's on the call yet. So before we jump into our mentees presentation, I encourage those of us that are not putting on our videos to turn on videos, smile for the camera for 30 seconds so we can take our screenshots. Thank you very much. Let's go. Babajide Adam, the video is not on. Samuel Dimafido, Onyinye Okoli, John Aji, Sobowale. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, okay. I've taken a few screenshots. You can see people putting on the videos as I'm taking more. Okay. All right. We're jumping on to our mentee's presentation now. We're taking. I'll permit group two AI presenter. I hope you're ready. I'll permit her to take her presentation first. So you can unmute yourself while I'm trying to help you share your screen.
Okay, good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here. And thank you for the opportunity to present first. I know we are group two, so we also have come after group one, but I made a request because I'm sure we can see that I'm in transit, so may not have been able to share my screen. But we are very, our group is ready to talk about this. So our topic is really about AI bias and it is for fundamental human rights. So the first question is, what are fundamental human rights? So fundamental human rights really talks about the intrinsic rights that belong to every human person. So whether the person is fully formed as a physical person that you can see, or the person is still a fetus in the womb of his mother or her mother, that person, as long as he gets to a certain stage in his gestation, can be seen to be a fully developed being, has fundamental human rights. And these human rights are protected by the various constitutions and the sovereignty of our various countries. So there are international laws that protect all of us, whether we come from Nigeria or we come from different countries. But there are also certain laws within the jurisdiction of where you live. But what we're going to be talking about today would be the fundamental that applies to everybody, whether they know it or they don't know it. And I'll be giving examples such as freedom of liberty, freedom of expression, the freedom of rights to food, as well as the right to life in itself. So these are some conversations we are going to talk about these fundamental human rights and how the AI bias that we've been already hearing from our mentors affects these human rights. AI bias, as we've already heard earlier, is really about the tendency for AI itself in its creation to be biased against a certain group of people. It's not just only in its creation, but also in its implementation. AI, artificial intelligence, is really generated from data sets, and data sets, the data that's imputed in those data sets are created by human beings, and we already have our flaws. So intrinsically, these flaws will reflect in the data sets in itself. So it's already been established that we have artificial intelligence is not perfect. It has bias, and how does that affect fundamental human rights? And I will be talking about, let me start from the fundamental rights. Let me start from the fundamental rights to, for example, the right to life. We as human beings have a right to life. We have a right and expectancy to life. We do not expect that our life expectancy will be cut short for a person set for a specific, depending on where we live. However, imagine a situation where AI has determined that a certain group of people have a particular tendency to become criminals if they get to the age of 25, maybe based on prior data or based on experience or based on genealogy. These certain group of people can be said that, oh, we are not going to allow them to live beyond the age of 25 because they tend to become criminals or they become murderers or things like that. That's a tendency for AI to be used negative to possibly affect human life, the fundamental rights to life. Let's take a look at our social media platforms. social media platforms, people post certain things on Instagram, Twitter. We've had public examples where public figures were shut down because what they posted was not seen to be, or was flagged as a red flag, as the tendency to create anarchy or to create war and things like that. The question with this is, the AI that has flagged this certain post, what is the criteria? What's the yardstick for that? Because I mean, and I'll give examples. What Trump can say on Twitter can also be said by an SS2 boy living in Nigeria. Does the SS2 boy have a right to say those things on Twitter without being flagged or his account being removed? And a former president of the United States gets flagged, gets removed for almost similar or exactly the same thing. The question is, why is AI flagging one and not flagging the other? I would also like to talk about the right to liberty, freedom of movement. It's a fundamental human right. Now, AI has been known since inception to use like facial recognition, right? So facial recognition systems have been really good in the contribution they have done in using technology to make our lives easier and automated. You can use facial recognition to unlock your phones, to sign in into certain key places. You can use these things, make life a lot easier for us. Agree. However, facial recognition has also been seen to have been biased, especially in situations like traffic offenses, where it has been discovered that a lot of traffic offenders, AI has highlighted more traffic offenders within the African American or the Blacks. Now, in certain areas like in Detroit, many people no longer want to have to drive cars because they feel like they have a tendency to be pulled over more than if they were a white driver driving within specific areas or specific time within specific time frames. So in areas like Detroit, for example, you find a Black person not. I hope I'm being heard, because
yes, you're being heard. Go ahead.
Okay. So in Detroit, for example, a Black person may not want to drive at night because there's a tendency that between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., the tendency for them to be pulled over is maybe 50% more than if it was a white person that was being pulled over. This reduces the fundamental rights to freedom. This reduces mobility. Also, there's also gender bias when it comes to our certain fundamental rights. So fundamental rights to work. You find out that there was a research that was done that I think it was Amazon that had done that. They had discovered that they had put into certain data into their data sets that indicated that a lot more people within the C-suites were men. So men were more likely to get executive roles more than women, 27% more than women. So if you're looking for the opportunity to get a particular job, AI would deem that the CVs of a man was better placed for that role, better than a woman. This restricts the opportunities for women to get equal rights to work. And this was done, this is evidenced by AI bias. Now, most of these things, when we talk about AI bias, kind of looks like it is a bit up in the air, it's a bit cloud, but there are real life scenarios that have actually affected real life living people's fundamental rights. And I'll give an example for a Palestinian worker. So a Palestinian worker was just going about his day, and in his day, he took a picture beside, I took a picture and posted it on Facebook. Now, he's a Palestinian, and you know that in Palestine, there's always this conflict that goes on between Palestinians and the Israelites, right? So he posted and he put something in Arabic. The artificial intelligence flagged that what he wrote in Arabic as attack them. He took the literal interpretation of that as attack them. And so he was arrested, he was detained, and there was a lot of investigation going on, thinking that he was maybe a terrorist going to be fighting against the Israelites and things like that. It was after investigation found out that what he actually meant, which is an alternative interpretation of his words, was really about, I think he was saying good morning or something like that. That's what he was referring to. But because of his genealogy, because he was Palestine, because, you know, he was within the regions of the Israelites, the initial assumption was that this person was a threat. Meanwhile, he wasn't a threat. So he had lost his fundamental rights to freedom. He has lost his fundamental right to be treated fairly because there was AI bias against him based on a literal interpretation that was that has affected him generally. Okay, so I think I wanted to address the issue of women not having the fundamental rights to work. These fundamental rights may not necessarily be seen very clearly. If you go to an office for you to get a job, you would assume that the reason why you didn't get the job was maybe because you didn't qualify. But so the effect of it is not really felt immediately. The criteria for choosing this, the data that is inserted into the AI is also not seen immediately. And our conclusion is that we would like to see more transparency in the data sets on how something was created. And I'll use ChatGPT as an example. So ChatGPT is a very popular artificial intelligence that has made it easy to research, made it easy to do paper presentations. But it just says, oh, we have trained this AI. But the process of it being trained is not made public, or not even public, but it's not even made open to the users. The process of the kind of data that ChatGPT has had access to is also not made open to the users. There was a situation where, there are two live matters where ChatGPT has been sued for using data that it did not have copyright over. It took data from certain books and the authors have sued it. They also took information from actors and actresses that did not give their authorization for it to be used. Now, the question is, artificial intelligence and bias, and this is a question that I would like the mentors to address. Can we start asking questions on seeing a higher level of transparency where artificial intelligence tools, we can see the history and the data that is imputed into it, when it is imputed, the history of the people who have the habit of, and the history and the habits of the people who have imputed this AI data into the AI and how they have actually been trained. In law, I think that when we are looking at a certain piece of evidence, we talk about the chain of custody, how something from when the evidence was generated and who has been handling that before it gets to court to see if that's a good, if it remains unstained and remains tangible to use as evidence. We would like to see AI have more transparent chain of custody from the people inserting, people training, to all the data sets that it comes across to the execution. And I would just like to end on that note. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ineme Seat, for that wonderful presentation. On behalf of Group 2, I'll be giving the floor to Group 1, who awaits our mentors' comments and also the questions that you asked, their answers to the questions. So I'm giving the floor to Group 1 presenter. You can share your screen and you can also unmute yourself and start. Thank you very much.
Okay, just to confirm that you can hear and see me.
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you clearly.
All right, so quickly, let me share my screen. Okay. Good afternoon once again, everybody. My name is John Aji, and I will be making this presentation on behalf of Group 1. So the topic broadly is, artificial intelligence bias and its implications on human rights. But Group 1 will be dwelling on the artificial intelligence biases. So by way of introduction, I would like to attempt a definition of what bias means. And bias simply means inclination towards something, one's predisposition, partiality, prejudices, and predilections towards either an individual, a group, or something. So as humans, we all have biases, right? If you are a football lover, if you're a football fan, you either have to choose between Ronaldo or Messi. So that's where your bias lies. So if you're a Ronaldo fan, oftentimes you tend to downplay, the achievements of Ronaldo's major opponent, which is Lionel Messi. In music, let's come down to Nigeria. We have people who call themselves Whiskey FC. We have people who call themselves 30BG. And by this, I'm referring to Whiskey and Davido. Okay, so that's where these biases lie. And sometimes you could see Whiskey pull a crowd of 50,000, 70,000, and 30BG fans will be like, oh, it doesn't matter, even though Davido hasn't done that, but they tend to downplay the importance of that achievement. And that is bias, basically. That is what bias means. Allowing your inclinations to show itself, right? To rear its head over and above, reasonability and reasoning. Generally, bias isn't bad, right? There's nothing bad about it. What makes it bad is if it is so explicit that it ridicules someone or a group, or if it's so explicit that it tends to subject people to hate, harm, or lawful trespass. So generally, that is what bias means. And for the purpose of this discussion, we'll be looking at bias in AI, machine learning bias, algorithm bias. And I'll start by saying that there's a tendency that algorithms reflect human biases. Just like one of our mentors, Mr. Gabriel, said, this is a garbage in, garbage out issue. So we're looking at machines here. So it's whatever you put into it that it gives out. However, there are instances where, because of some computations from the back end or some fault, the machine can on its own misbehave. But generally, the bias is only reflected by the input it gets. Okay, so let's take a look at the types of bias. Broadly, there are two types of bias. Other kinds of bias flow from these two. So it could either be algorithmic AI bias or data bias and societal bias. So some examples of the algorithmic AI bias include the fact that they flow from inadequacy of data, also that it could be technical issues from coding errors, and also that these biases could flow from new information or patterns that were probably not envisaged at the time that this AI tool was being created. And then societal bias include situations where the AI tool only mirrors the prejudices of the person creating it or the person who invents it. It could also mean, behaving in a way that reflects the intolerance or discrimination when you talk about racism, health inequalities, and all of that. And then it could also mean that the algorithmic bias or the back end influence is only seen by the output, and that also speaks to the prejudices of whoever is behind the scenes. So when it comes to bias, arguments have been advanced by developers of AI tools. When you put some of these biases to fore, some of the arguments that they have advanced is that it's about equity, not equality. And some will tell you, especially when you talk about racism, and they would say, this isn't about equality, it's about equity. So as a group, we consider that, and our submission is that regardless of what the intentions are, there should be equity. And then you can see from the graphic here, we try to explain that by saying equality means that everybody is treated the same, while equity means that everybody gets what they need or what they require to be successful. So in attempting AI tools or in developing AI tools, equality and equity have to be adequately gauged. Let's take a look at some of these instances where AI bias have reared its head. On the left, if you are looking at the screen, you'd see that researchers found in 2019 that an algorithm used in US hospitals to predict which patients would require additional medical care favored white people over Black people. And on the right, you could see, of course, a Twitter user lamenting. Apparently, she tried to use a photo AI tool, and she tried to work on something with pictures of former US President Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, and Laverne Cox. And you can see the result. We all know that Obama is Black, but you can see the output. And that only tells you it only puts or brings to bear the bias of whoever is behind this tool. So that is a good example of AI bias. We know that Oprah Winfrey is Black, Barack Obama is Black, Laverne Cox is Black, but the output here shows otherwise. So that is one of the things I'm talking about. Another example is, if you're looking at the screen, you would see another example where, first of it is where, according to available data, women make up about 27% of CEOs in the United States. However, a research was done using an AI tool, and the output only shows about 11% of these women out of the 27%. On the right, you'd see someone, of course, tried to get stock photos using an AI tool. And the imputation was an American man and his car, and on the other hand, an African man and his car. You can see the results for the American man and his car, looking, very healthy, looking tush and all. But on the other hand, you see an African man and his car looking impoverished, looking tacky and all. So that also tells you how a Black man is perceived in the mind of whoever developed this tool. So that is also a good example. And then another example here is, if you're looking at the screen, you see this is a result from Amazon. Apparently, a CV optimization tool, developed by Amazon, which clearly brings to bear the patriarchal, mindset of whoever must have been behind this AI tool. And you can see that as a result of analyzing resumes for a decade, Amazon's computer models can spot similarities in candidates' applications. Most were males, reflecting the industry's male dominance. Amazon's algorithm learned that male applicants were preferred. So, so if the implication is, if as a female you make an application for a job using this AI tool, the chances of scaling through the first test are slim, because this AI tool was programmed in such a way that it gives precedence to the male gender over the female gender. And that also brings to bear the bias of whoever must have been behind this technology. And then you can also see a chart where speech recognition tool was tested. And this is, of course, from big tech companies. We have Apple, IBM, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. And apparently, it seeks to favor white voices over black voices. So this is also a case of racism. And it also tells you about whoever must have developed this tool. The person must have, the person is probably white, and the person is someone who perceives the black race as inferior. So that also is clear from the output that the AI technology is giving. And we also took a deep dive into some of the realities in biases in artificial intelligence. And then we tried to compare and contrast 4, different variables. One, you can see the real-world patterns of health inequality. You can see the data, you can see how they were used, and you can see the design. So the real-world patterns of health inequalities range from unequal access and resource allocation to discriminatory healthcare processes, biased clinical decision-making. And then the data, of course, has to do with sampling biases and lack of representative data sets to patterns of bias and discrimination, which are baked into data subscriptions. We also took a look at the application injustices, and then one of them is disregarding and deepening digital divides, exacerbating global health inequality, and rich-poor treatment gaps. And then biased designs and how they are deployed. You could see power imbalances in agenda setting and problem formulation to biased deployment, explanation, and systems monitoring practices. So these are the realities when it comes to bias in AI. And then we also, took a look at the causes of AI bias. Why do these biases abound? And some of the examples are insufficient training data. Sometimes the people behind the scenes are not aware, or they do not have enough data in their hands, so they go by what they were probably brought up with, what they heard while growing up, and then information available to them. We also have unexpected data sets and combinations that may arise after development, of course, unforeseen contingencies. We also have low diversity among AI professionals and developers, people who were not diverse in their upbringing. Their upbringing, their training, their ideologies in life is just linear, leaning towards one direction. For instance, if you are white, you do not have black friends, you are a Christian, you do not have Muslim friends. So you view life from one dimension, and that could affect, of course, your perception of life and your perception of people who do not subscribe to your ideology. And then another example is human biases filtering into training data. Of course, this correlates with what I've said, as I just said. And then we also took a look at computing or coding errors, contingencies unforeseen as well. So we also, as part of research, we looked at ways that AI technology practitioners and business and policy leaders can bring these biases to, or how they can tackle these biases in such a way that they do not cast a race or a group in bad light. And then this also forms the crux of our recommendations. And one of them is that AI practitioners should be aware of context in which AI can help correct for bias, and those in which there is high risk for AI to exacerbate bias. And the second is for processes and practices to be established to test and mitigate bias in AI systems. And also that fact-based conversations about potential biases and in human decisions should be engaged, and then that they should fully explore how humans and machines can best work together, invest in bias research so that you do not make a faulty, proposition, invest more in diversifying the AI field, and then some other recommendations which came, of course, after this presentation had been submitted, that human rights should occupy a prominent place in the governance of AI. And this is just so that it waters down bias. Another recommendation is that government and authorities should require that suppliers or developers of AI technology should respect race, culture, and human rights. And then the third and final recommendation is that AI protocols should be based on strict standards that incorporate human rights rules and principles that are not offensive or do not subject any race or group to ridicule. So in conclusion, we of course acknowledge that AI is developed by humans, modeled after the workings of their mind and how they are trained. And from, of course, there's also a quote here, woke as you are. So again, that talks about the garbage in, garbage out popular statement. So the artificial intelligence tool or artificial intelligence technology can only function as best as the mind of whoever it is that is developing them. So we hope that with these recommendations, if implemented, AI will be better. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Mr. John. Thank you very much, the Group 1 PowerPoint compiler. Thank you very much, Group 1 leader, and all the Group 1 members. Very, very wonderful PowerPoint slides. It's very rich, it's very self-explanatory and very detailed. Thank you very much once again, Mr. John, for that wonderful presentation. And also, thank you very much to Group 2's presenter, all the team. So I'll be giving the floor to our mentors to give us the quick comments on the both presentation. If there's any correction also, I would like to take them from our mentors before we jump into the question and answer session. So Mr. Gilbert can go first with the
okay.
comments.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, the presenters, University and John. Thank you for, I think both presentations took two different approaches and created some kind of balance. The first group was, I have a strong feeling that the presenter is either a lawyer or has a law background of some sort. Looked more about the social, legal and human rights perspective. This one presentation for Group 1 was sounded more technical. They had some very technical terms, and this it created that balance. For Group 2, that's the first presentation now. The question, I remember she talked about asking for a history or habits of those who train the systems. This is one of the very major questions, the major problems we have with artificial intelligence today. I mean, the question is not new. It's been there. We all understand that's the concern. If you remember when I can't remember, but one of our sessions, I mentioned that one of the ways to fix the problems is not to look at the tool itself, but to look at the persons that train the tool. What are they using to train the tool, and all those other things that lead back to the training data itself. But then when you speak to the guys in the technical field, if you understand what happens at the back end, you'd realize that even though this is very necessary, it's important, it's very difficult to do that. Let me give a very common, an easy example, right? Most of these open source, open access, or whatever I choose to call them, softwares. I use ChatGPT again, for instance. Like I mentioned at the introduction, every time you ask a question or input some data, you're also helping to train ChatGPT. So imagine that the over 100 million people in the world that are using ChatGPT are contributing to the training data of ChatGPT. How is it possible for OpenAI, whenever you make this request, to give you the details, specific details, these details about the person that has trained the system? That's one. Number, remember, there are sometimes up to billions of parameters. We are not sure. We hear 175 billion, we hear trillions and all that. I mean, these companies are not very transparent when it comes to training parameters for their software for whatever reason. So it would be too complicated to tell, even for the companies themselves, I think, to tell who trained, who fed the system with a particular set of data, with a particular kind of information. It's easier with smaller systems. I think under, even under the GDPR, under the NDP, I've seen it in the new NDPA, it's easy to trace where your data is, what data is kept in the system. This is in normal data protection laws and data protection systems, because you can tell who's with your data. If something changes, it's easier to tell. So you can make this request under those laws. But when the system is automated, and then you have, with the very complicated machine learning methods that we have now, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very complicated. And I mean, it opens so many other doors. You can hear now that actors and writers are striking. They're saying LLMs are using their work without attribution, proper attribution. So it opens many, it's going to cause many other issues. And these issues are going to continue for such a long time. So again, like you said, it's very concerning that we don't know who is training the system that is being used against us, or that is being used to provide information about us, right? We don't know who, we don't know where it's getting the information. But unfortunately, the information gets there for some reason. The systems are being trained with data from us, whether it's the truth or not. And it's complicated, it's difficult to trace who and what kind of person, where did they get their information from, or what kind of data sets are being used to train a particular system. I know it's also possible with smaller models, smaller systems, but with very large language models with billions of parameters, it's going to be almost impossible to get that information. That's for group 2. Group 1, first of all, I like how you presented, you talked about bias. It gives a very unpopular view about bias and issues like equality. Many people think once we hear the word bias, we think, oh, it's really bad. Every human being, when I did my court attachment many years back, told me that every judge has a bias, whether you like it or not. Every human being, whether you admit it or not, has a bias. Just sit back and think. Everyone understands the meaning of bias. Just sit back and think there's something in your life, that there's something that helps you with taking certain decisions. So you can tell yourself, no, it's not there, but it's there. We all know it's there. And then just like the president, John had said, what matters is how it reflects in your decision against other people or against situations. So even in AI systems, we are certainly going to have some of these biases because they are built by human beings. But it becomes a problem where, just like in the case of humans, it gives a wrong impression, or it causes undue influence on, well, let me use the word undue, but it could be more serious than that, on the decisions that are taken in these circumstances or against certain persons or systems. Again, he also mentioned, and I agree totally, that, well, I prefer to use the equality in my most times is fair. Equality is unfair, not all, unquote. equal. You go to your classroom and sit down, look at the person sitting beside you, just look at the shirt you're wearing, look at the shirt the other person is wearing. Life, biologically, first, we're not equal. The society does not put us on an equal platform. People were born into poor homes, people are born into wealthy homes and all that. So when you say everyone, there are people who have to go to work at night and come and write a test in the morning. There are people who are sleeping. There are people who are sitting in the class all through the night, but they are all going to write the same test. Well, that's equality because we are doing the same thing. We are expected to give the same good answers. But it does not consider, for instance, there are pregnant women that come to the class. So I had one in, writing by exam with. It is completely impossible, naturally impossible for me as a young male person that had nothing to worry about, my parents were sending money to be at the same mental state with a pregnant woman who has a family to take care of at home and is writing the same set of questions under the same 3 hours and all that. So that aside, these things are always going to pop up. But then you talked finally to the proposed recommendations. I've read that report from McKinsey, I think. Those discussions, those recommendations mostly point at policymakers. Truly, it's about what questions should we ask ourselves before we start making policies to control or to regulate artificial intelligence. But there is a flip side to it. Even before while waiting for the policymakers to decide on what questions to ask, just like the first presenter mentioned, ask about people that are developing the system. What recommendation we have? How about if we create a licensing system for these developers? If you don't get this license, so they pass through a particular kind of training, which could now include human rights-based approaches. We train them on human rights-based approaches towards the systems development. These are things that we've thought about, but these are mostly for the people in the technical field. Sincerely, a large percentage of those are in the technical field will not look at technologies the way we look at it from the social sciences. And from their perspectives, they are right. From our perspective, we are also right. So we need to get this interdisciplinary training. The developers will tell you this is only possible to this point. So if it's possible to sit down and also speak with the developer, we have to involve them. Otherwise, no matter what regulations we have, as long as the developers do not understand the implications of what actually, the output of their systems, the outcome of the systems, or those that train the system for whatever reason, we're still going to have problems. So the recommendations are really good for the policymakers, but we also have to look at the guys that design the system. We can look at the owners of the companies, but then it's like trying to regulate healthcare and you're regulating the hospitals. How about the doctors? We have a licensing for doctors. We have licensing for lawyers because what they do affects other people. It affects human life. So they have to be streamlined. There has to be some level of training before they're allowed to do certain things. Even to drive a car, you need a license. So I have always thought we should also involve developers in some strict kind of training and licensing. So we know by this, if a lawyer commits or does something wrong, maybe a professional misconduct, it's easy to go to the Supreme Court and put, oh, this is the lawyer, and they find his name on the roll. So it's easy to do. We can have these same things with developers, have a role for them if we need to. So, and then finally, I had also noted here that there are other approaches that you could use. I've talked about the people-centered approach and the human rights-based approach. You mentioned having human rights in this, implemented through the technologies. This is totally true, but we must also look at how the people-centered approach. What do the people that are actually affected by these technologies? We need to ask people. For instance, you want to put a camera at the side of your house. You ask your neighbor, is it okay with this camera here? Is it going to affect you? Are you doing things in your compound that you don't need to be seen? Or think this is just a basic example, but we can look at the communities or the people that actually use technologies. What kind of AI systems would they be open to using? What are they? What would they prefer? What is going to be unfair to them? Because there are some things that may be, when we look at it from the human rights perspective, they are very correct, but there's some level of immorality that comes with them, right? If you look at them ethically, there are some things that are legal, but they are not ethical, right? So we have to also look at the perspectives of the people that are using the systems or that the systems are being used against. These are the few things I could pick from the top of my head. If I missed out anything, I'm sure somebody will ask me in the process. So thank you very much for your presentations once again.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Gabriel, for the contribution and also the clarification on the both presenters' presentation. I would also be giving the floor to our second mentor for today to give us his own insights, his own contribution on presentation. Mr. Felix, if you are still with us, please kindly unmute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Udo, and of course the presenter. I personally enjoyed the presentation, both presentation, and I will not want to repeat all that Mr. Udo has said, because personally, I think I agree with him 100%. So I'll just point out a few things. I'll also try not to take a lot of time, so that in case we have questions, we can address them. And I can see that our time is fast spent. So just a few things. Let me start from where I think Samuel, or who presented for the second group. Now, you mentioned the issue of bias, and let me just start from this point of a bit of digression. I think to some extent I want to disagree that having bias is not bad. And I will explain, because I know Mr. Udo talk about this, that everybody has bias, and even biases. I agree. There's something you call conscious bias, and there's something you call unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is actually the bias you have, you're not conscious of, and it actually affects you. The conscious bias is the one you know you actually have it. And I think we should start from that point of the conscious bias we have. Why I said I do not so much agree that bias is good, I would say inherently that bias is actually bad. And I'll explain why. Because it actually affects your objectivity. It prevents you from seeing things and people as they really are. And when you have such bias, it affects your relationship. It affects your estimation. It affects how you relate with people. And I'm speaking so generally now about bias. You know, for example, let's assume I'm a Yoruba man. I just assume that every Hausa person is dumb and stupid. You know, that's a very serious bias. So this attitude is going to affect the way you relate, even to the former President Buhari. You are going to continue to, even though you know you are wrong, but it continues to affect you. And so I think we should sit back and look at each of us, which kind of bias do we have? Some people have bias to say that every lawyer is a liar. And they continue, each time you talk, they just assume you're lying. Even though we are coming with a logical argument, the person has rounded you off, and you'll say, okay, this guy is always lying. But we all know that lawyers are not lying. It shows at the level of ignorance. And each time you have such bias, it just affects the way you process information, and it affects your relationship, it affects your personality. So today we are talking about AI biases. I think we should also talk about our own personal biases. I'm not discussing that, that's not the topic. But after leaving this place, you may want to check yourself. What are those predispositions that I have? Some prejudice I maintain towards certain people or certain places or certain human beings. As I grow up, I continue to ask myself, why do I think that people think this way? And you know, the way you think affects your relationship with people, and it affects the way they also estimate you. I've been, for example, and I'm sorry I'm discussing this because it will not go into the central part of our topic, but it's extremely important. So if we are here interrogating, and of course, let me say, opposing the fact that AI has biases, AI is that is even true. How much more we human beings that we have biases? And I think it's important we talk about it. I remember I was in University of Haifa at the Center for Cyber Law and Policy in 2017 or so to deliver a paper on artificial intelligence. And I'm talking about this not just to tell you how, maybe because in that place I was the only Black man that I came to present. And again, I don't like using the word Black, but conventionally, let's just admit that's not a bias. I came from Africa. And before the presentation, I needed to charge my phone. There was no charging point in my hotel room that I could use because of the plug system. I didn't notice that before I traveled to Israel. So I had to go to use the lady controlling the technical session to say, please help me charge my phone. By the time I was coming back to pick the phone, the lady was no more there. So I met a young Hebrew guy and I asked him, can you please give me my phone? The next thing he looked at me and said, we don't steal phone in this place. I was extremely pissed off. I was so annoyed and enraged. It got to the point I had to be asking myself, guy, can you just calm down? You are the only Nigerian in this place. If you are fighting, nobody will even check. I actually talked to him. It was very clear. What happened, he has bias against Nigerians and Africans. He believed that we all steal. He believed we are thieves. And so he assumed that I was telling him, please don't steal my phone. Can you give my phone back to me? Meanwhile, I was just asking for my phone innocently because I needed to call. So this is what bias does. And so let me just go because of our time. So please, I think we should be consciously looking out for biases, even in our own activity, and be able to address them. Now, we talk about the aspects of bias, and in our presentation, we talk about human rights. Let me start from that first presentation. Good presentation with a lot of legal information for us to look at. Now, currently, I think we're just discussing bias from the theoretical point of view, or probably just looking at it, how does it affect the operation of AI, human interaction, application of output emanating from AI devices. But I think I look at it far beyond this, in the sense that decisions being made based on this output is affecting the society. And once it affects the society, it affects human rights. And once it affects human rights, it raises constitutional issues. And once it raises constitutional issues, it's talking about enforcement of fundamental human rights. And when you come to enforcement, it's talking about the issue of damages and all other stuff that will go on in court. Even though we have not gone to that extent, but these are possibilities. And for me, it becomes a bit extremely important that we begin to look at how does this affect human rights. And that's just going to take me quickly into the second presentation, which of course Mr. Audo has spoken extensively about, but I'll just speak maybe a few aspects, then we'll go to question. Now, the presenter talked about equity, and of course, he talked about equality. This has been my position. Equality is not justice. Justice is giving each person his due. In fact, I define justice as the unequal treatment of the unequal, and the equal treatment of the equals. That's justice. And so that is us to equity. That kind of pictures, I've seen it. I've seen pictures of somebody trying to look at the stadium on the same platform, and they could not see it until they were put on different platforms which were higher than one another. But the question I ask is, who determines this equity? See, this is what is extremely important. Who determines what is equitable? And that takes me to the regulation of the big techs. Now, you have a tweet on Twitter, and somebody is saying it's repugnant. It's probably offensive. The first question is, who determines what is offensive? So Facebook determines, Elon Musk determines what is offensive on Twitter. Then to whom is Elon Musk responsible? To whom is Twitter answerable? So because Twitter itself is a bunch of biases, so long as it is being run by a human who cannot be separated from biases. And so that brings me to the fact of regulation. We just cannot overemphasize the need to regulate the AI sector. Whichever we can't overemphasize. I personally hate the idea of saying the big tech are self-regulating. What's the sense of self-regulation? How does a man determine what is right and determine what is wrong all by himself and enforces the same thing? You're creating behemoths. You're creating people who just trample on people's rights as they like and go. And I think this was what actually got former president pissed off. So I put on a tweet and just delete it. And you're operating in my environment. So a lot of us complain about this, but I remember as a lawyer, I was advising my employer that you can't even say he has violated any human rights, because even Twitter itself was operating illegally in Nigeria. So that time they were not paying tax and they were collecting money. So the question is, who regulates this? So you can't call yourself self-regulating big tech. That will never continue to exist if we are talking about the aspect of addressing issue of ethical consideration and biases. We all know that, in fact, bias is probably more expressed in the Western world than we have it in this place. And I'm sorry if this is not actually a form of bias. So we have to look at the aspect of regulation. And I know Mr. Udo has talked about regulation of AI practitioners, developers, and all that. I really do not want to go into those details because it will sound quite repetitive. So, but and this is the idea we see. If you see when my profile was being read, I was part of those who developed the policy. The policy is still going through approval for AI in Nigeria. It was actually the Minister of Digital Economy that constituted the committee, and I needed to work extensively on the committee to say, we can't just have AI which is affecting everybody's life, and it just opened there. Nobody is talking about law, nobody is talking about regulation. It's just over there, and you say it will just be self-regulating. You know, currently, I remember part of what I deliver in Israel was AI is affecting every aspect of our lives. And this is taking me to aspects of regulation. You see, currently, people are getting married to artificial intelligent dogs. They are getting married to robots. A time will come, I'm sure, maybe in the US, the definition of marriage will include marriage to robots, which is going to change a whole lot of our entire life. I overheard that Mr. Udo is working on ethical aspects of deployment of weapons. Now, in international conflict, and of course in the rule of international armed conflict, there are some people that should not be killed when you are fighting. They include pregnant women, they include children. Now, imagine somebody sitting in Pentagon in the US and controlling some buttons and just shooting people and detonating weapons. How does it differentiate between the civilians who are not harmed, differentiate between women and children as opposed to the belligerent he needs to fight? But he just sits there and just detonate and people die. So this is one aspect. Now you talk about, we are talking about JIIPCCMIP. These are just a bit of, to me, it's just all over the place. JIIPCCMIP, when you consider it with the issue of armed weapon, when you talk about the issue of marriage, you talk about the issue of espionage. Currently, AI is being used for spying. It's getting confidential information, getting a lot of stuff about companies and all that, and you don't have regulation. So I think we have to continue to talk about the aspects of regulation. And I'm looking forward to a time when maybe lawyers on this forum will begin to take out certain cases and go to court to test the status of our law. If the legislatures are not waking up to do what they need to do, let's go through the back door, let's go through the judiciary and begin to get certain judicial pronouncement as to what happened when my right is violated through the use of AI. In fact, imagine having a courtyard in my house, and I'm sitting with my wife, I'm playing with my children in the evening, and one photographer is just using what do you call it? Using this gadget that moves to capture picture. I'm trying to.
Is it drone?
Yes, drone. Thank you. Using drone to capture picture and video. And it's captured me a video with my family in our private setting. And the next thing you see my video somewhere. I'm not going to be filing case against a drone. I'm going to file this case against whoever uses the picture or the video and whoever operated the drone. We have not been seeing all these things coming up. And I think it's high time we begin to look at this aspect. If at all we want to look at regulation of AI and also address the aspect of bias, which I know we have spoken about extensively. So at this point, okay, I've talked about the aspect of responsibility also, because Mr. Udo talked about this. Responsibility lies at the door of the person who developed this. And I remember, imagine a situation where you talk about the self-driving car. There was a case in the US, which of course, I think I wrote an article on self-driving car killed a pedestrian. It's quite unfortunate. I don't like the fact that they settled out of court. But the fact that they settled out of court shows that Uber believe it has responsibility. But for me, the responsibility is not even limited to Uber. The first question, I know it's a convoluted web of responsibilities. You should be talking about who developed the AI device that was controlling the vehicle, who was supposed to be monitoring. You talk about insurance. You talk about the company that developed the car. It's a whole chain. But unfortunately, we will have had a judicial precedent in that case. Unfortunately, they settled out of court, and the settlement agreement is confidential, so we can't even know what happened. But what I'm saying is, if there's no regulation, we'll have to go through the judiciary to begin to see what happened. And it is not out of place if we begin to see it from Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Felix, and thank you very much, Mr. Udo. We've taken note of all the points you guys point out on both presentation, the corrections, and the comments. So we are moving on to question and answer session right now. I encourage everyone that has any live question to raise your hand while my co-moderator call on you to ask your question. I can see Amina also posted the questions for our mentor on the chat box. So I'll also give the floor to Amina to continue moderating the session from here. So Amina Adam, do we have you on the call?
Yes, Hussein. Thank you so much for moderating up to this point. Thank you so much for your time. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, I'll be taking the questions. If you have live questions, you can raise your hands if you want to ask directly, or you can paste your questions on the chat box. So I'll be taking, I saw one question and I'll be taking the question. I'll be directing the question to Mr. Gabriel. It says it's from Omoshe. I don't know if it's Omoshe or Omose Paul. What is generative AI? Mr. Gabriel, over to you.
Okay, yeah, of course. Since we've spent a lot of time on this, I'm just going to give very brief answers as much as possible to this specific. Now, I know the confusion is usually with the word generative, but that's where the whole answer to the question lies. AI, of course, we all know what AI is so far. Generative AI, those artificial intelligence technologies or systems that generate, that's the word, they generate text, images, or other forms of data. Some generate videos, I mean, based on prompts that have been given. So they use, they have neural networks, they use machine training methods. You just feed it with information and then it generates some piece of information. Now the confusion there is, when you're looking at, I remember we're working on a paper on intellectual property on AI generated works, for instance. And then the first question was, is it even original? Then the question about generation comes. Where does it generate it from? First of all, understand that AI generally, just imagine a box of ones and zeros, right? That's all that there is 1 and 0. For those that do coding, whatever you feed it with, the natural language process is being converted into ones and zeros and reconverted. So one way or the other, the only thing that happens at the back end is just scanning through the algorithm, looking at ones and zeros, whatever networks have is being used to train, and then it generates. So it only generates from what is pre-existing. It certainly learns from somewhere and dishes out information from that, either text or images or videos or maps sometimes, or whatever other forms of data it's been required for. So that's my whole percent. That's the easiest way to describe it.
Thank you so much, sir, for that comprehensive definition and explanation. The second question, I will direct it to Mr. Felix. It says, what are the challenges in identifying and mitigating AI bias, and how can they be overcome? Mr. Felix, over to you, sir.
Okay, so I'm not too sure. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
I think we have addressed this question. So yes, extensively while we're trying to comment on the presentation, but just to let you know, okay, maybe so that it doesn't look like we're running away from the question, but again, to save time, we are talking about challenges in identifying. It may be difficult for you to actually identify when you are not the programmer or the developer of this AI device, and you are relying on the information they provide. For example, the examples that have been cited, especially in the presentation, if somebody did not check again, or if there was no data which was contrary to the data generated by the use of those devices, you wouldn't have known that they were biased. For example, the one you talk about, the CEO from Google search, if there was no contradicting information, you wouldn't have known. And so it's a bit of a challenge for you to actually know if there's a bias already against you, which means that there must be an alternative data that you can use to counterbalance the output emanating from such device. And that is the challenge that it poses. So when we talk about mitigation of bias in terms of a lot of examples have been cited, the people developing this, the nature of information being put into it, and a whole lot of this. Now, let me just go to the aspect of overcoming. How do we overcome? And again, I spoke extensively on the issue of regulation, evaluation, assessment of those who is involved in the AI practice. So as long as we continue to see human instrumentality involved in this process, there must be a process in place that will checkmate the aspect of bias. You've seen some cartoon created that usually will use certain set of human beings for certain tribe or sex. Well, okay, I use sex quite generally, or let me use the word gender for the purposes of a better communication. I use certain gender in order to do certain things. So in such instance, you could have issue of bias. So we're talking about the aspect of there should be a process that will train the input coming into AI device, which is giving it back to you. And that takes me to the comment that Mr. Audu talked about in the first question. Now, recently, I don't know how many of us know, a lawyer in the US actually used JIIPCCMIP to prepare a process in court. And it was caught. And you see what happened. Most of the precedents, most of the cases the lawyer referred to were actually not existing. They were actually just fabricated by JIIPCCMIP. And I know you will probably be facing issue of professional misconduct and all that. And so in such instance, we should be responsible. So it's a whole wide world of complexities and convolution. But I think I don't want to repeat what we have said before. What we need to begin to do is there must be alternative way of verifying data emanating from AI device. That may seem quite Herculean, but this is one of the basic ways through which you can check. For example, you've always heard that, oh, today they want to say the oldest man in the world. You probably see them going to the Asia, Japan, or somewhere. But do you know that some people in the remote villages of Nigeria that are up to 150 years old, and nobody actually knows them? But because the data you know is the one of one Asian person who is probably 120 years or 130, and you see it on the Guinness Book of Records, this is the oldest person in the world. This is the problem we have. And when you come to particularize it in Africa, we have to begin to generate our information. We have to begin to talk about our own data. I know this is the most difficult issues we have as a continent. I don't know if I'm already talking about another question. In order to address this issue of bias, especially against us as a people, we must have our own information and not depend on people out there to just develop one AI device and begin to tell our stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was very good. That was comprehensive. I'm sure they are convinced and you've answered their questions. The next question will be directed to Mr. Gabriel. It says, how can individuals protect themselves from potential harm by biased AI systems?
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize my microphone was still muted.
Okay.
I think there are so many ways we can protect ourselves, unquote. But on the other hand, I must also mention that some of these ways are really complicated. One of them, for instance, is like Mr. Felix has mentioned. If you're able to correct your data, I mean, under the GDPR, I think it's also there in the NDPA, the right to correct your data, the right to have access to your data before it's made public, right? If you, in countries where people are allowed to change the agenda, when they do, they apply to whatever authorities have their data and ask for those things to be changed. Now, where this would be possible with small assistance, it's going to be more complicated. Going back to the explanation Mr. Felix just gave, it's possible, but it's going to be really more, way complicated to trace it all the way back to who has the data, how was the data collected, and all that. The smarter way to do it, rather, what has been suggested recently. Now, this is just one of the ways that it's something I just want to address before I move to the next one. The smarter way to do it is to, if you have access to, because what, for instance, like ChatGPT does is it crawls the web, right? It gathers data. So wherever you have your information on the web, most times, if I ask ChatGPT, who is Gabriel Udo, it's going to go to LinkedIn and get my LinkedIn profile. So I can control what information I want to be out, I can decide what I want to be on LinkedIn profile. I can be cautious about what data I allow on the internet. If maybe you have a profile with some company and the company says, hey, we're welcoming this person to our training and gives a profile about you, can write to the company, can you take this data off the internet? And that protects that data being used. Because up till now, there is no law against web crawling. And all LLMs, all large language models are using that. They just crawl the web, gather information. So the first way to, I think the easiest way so far would be to control what data you allow to be out there. That's number one. Number two would be something that we have talked about over and over and over. We cannot, there's a limit to how we can protect ourselves, but regulations can protect us. It's a very comprehensive way of protecting citizenry, not just from these kinds of harms, AI related harms, but from harms generally. If we have regulations that determine what kind of information is being put out there, I know we have the data protection laws, and there's a limit to what data protection laws can do. We need more AI specific regulations that look at these particular things, because data collection under the data protection laws, for instance, the NDPA, is going to be different when it is done by an automated system. This is the technical guys, they know this. Data collection, I can call you and ask you to give me your information, right? And then there are certain laws that bind me as to how I use that information. But if that information is, that's data collection one. But if that information is on the net, you posted somewhere, you posted your picture somewhere, maybe your picture is on Facebook, and somebody asked me, Johnny, please generate me an image of Amina, and it just quickly goes to wherever you had your picture and text. That's also data collection. But this, so far, is legal because there is no law against it at the moment, at least for the most I have studied. So we need regulations that are specific, that directly affect these methods, these particular harms that we are looking at. There are many other ways you can protect yourself from biases. The same way you could protect yourself from human biases. You could correct these biases. You could get into these systems if you can, and correct what piece of information you have there. The other forms of corrections are things I think can only be done by regulating agencies or governments. For instance, determining what kind of information people are allowed to put there. And finally, you can also try to change people's perspectives about you or about a particular thing that you do. People always say, like Mr. Felix mentioned, everybody says, lawyers are liars. whether we believe it or not, they believe it. We know. So we continue to prove to people that no, this perspective you have is totally wrong. The few I can go from the top of my head. So thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. The next question will be directed to Mr. Felix. It says, how will Africa adjust its data gathering and management processes in order to participate more in AI systems and bias considerations? Mr. Felix, over to you, sir.
Okay, so thank you so much, Amina. And please let me just state this. After answering this, please, I may need to be excused. I need to go to class. I'm actually currently at ABS for the program, Lagos Business School. So I needed to just take some time out. So this question is a multi-billion-dollar question. How will Africa adjust its data gathering and management process? I think this question first presupposes we have data gathering and management process, which I strongly doubt if we do. Now, let's start from the so-called giants of Africa. And I don't use this word in derogatory terms to refer to Nigeria, but we know what we are having, the challenges. Currently, my data is being taken by my bank. Almost the same data that the bank takes is the same data that immigration takes from me, the same data that NIMC takes from me, the same data that was, if a sensor is coming, they will take. Which other one? You can continue to mention almost 5 institutions will take the same data immigration takes. So we really do not have, maybe we have data gathering, but not data management. And so it's a bit of a serious issue for us, a serious issue when you talk about the issue of data. So talking about Africa, maybe we'll use Nigeria as an example. I think maybe it's possible in some other African countries, you have more improvements on data gathering and data management. Currently, I work with a telecommunication company, and I can tell you what happens when you talk about the shop gathering data. NIMC struggles a lot with the data you give to NIMC. And immigration, at times you go there, they will tell you that your data was not properly captured. You will need to go to Abuja in order to do this and that. The bank takes your fingerprint each time you want to. Just make the mistake to say you want to go and collect like $5,000 in bank today. They will need to take your picture, take your fingerprint, take everything, as if you were not the one that deposited the money. So we have serious issue with data gathering. We just do not get it. And for me, I think there should be a central processing system for our data. That, okay, if I've registered with NIMC, for example, I should not be going to bank and bank will still be asking me for my driver license or whatever. All the bank needs to do is to align with NIMC, and the next thing they get all my information. And that's why when you're in the US today, you pick up a telephone line, you don't need to register. Last year, I picked up a T-Mobile line in Florida. Nobody's asking me, come and give me a fingerprint. If you like, use that same line to commit offense. You know what happens to you. Because your location, just put it in your phone. In this instance, I'm not even an American, for example, but put it on your phone, your location, everything, your speech, everything, they have it. So if you like, use it to commit crime and just assume that you're in Nigeria, nobody knows it's a pre-registered line. You're wasting your time because they have all your information. But here I register, I provide all my information. The next thing I want to go to, Lagos will say, oh, all the residents come and give me your information. You will go there and give information. So our data gathering process is unorganized. And I think it's high time we began to talk about this, because this is why we continue to rely. For example, we're fighting Boko Haram, and we are still fighting. The federal government was depending on the US to give us the picture, the cadastral picture and all that in Sambisa. This is quite unimaginable. So we have to sit down as a country or as a continent and begin to determine. You know, this goes back to the question that, or to the comments that Mr. Odo gave when we started. The Africans are not interested in artificial intelligence. Probably have more issues disturbing us than talking about artificial intelligence. And the artificial intelligence is affecting every aspect of our lives. So for me, this question is bigger than us. Thank you. Somebody I just suggested that I may also take all my data. They take everything about me. And so I don't know who is holding my data. I don't understand. You have seen situation when you want to get your passport. The immigration say the data they have for you does not tally with namesake. And because of that, you have to come and pay. They will collect money from you for their own mistake. So it's a big mess. So maybe I will go to the second aspect. So in order to participate more in AI system and bias consideration, I said it when we started. If you're going to address bias, you address the veracity of your data. You address the accuracy of data. If you are going to address accuracy of data, you address the process of what? Of gathering the data, the process of data compilation. If we have not got that right, if we are still a people who are struggling with the number of our population, everybody today will just tell you Nigeria is about 250 million, Nigeria is about 200 million. There's no registration of birth and death. We don't know how many people are being given birth to. When in some places, they can almost tell you the number of dogs that they have in the city. So you should know that we have a big problem. And so somebody is going to come and generate one AI device and just tell you the number of Nigerians that are living below poverty level is 150 million. And you just throw the data at you. Everybody is taking the data all about. How do you know? And this takes me to the current, I'm not being political. When this government said they will be sharing 8,000 to poor households, I was laughing like a madman, or like somebody who just eats some raw gold. How do you even determine who is poor in the first place? Let's determine. Is it not in this country when a man who is walking on the street can be a millionaire and you don't even know? He may keep his cash at home. He may even have multiple accounts, you don't know. Then you go to the bank, you go to the market, you are sharing 8,000 naira to people, no data, you don't know who is collecting, you don't know who is not collecting. Are we not beside ourselves? And so when you begin to look, we have a big, I'm not here to highlight the problem of this country or the problem of this continent, but I think I'm just saying that we need to begin, and in our various places, maybe when we'll talk, the private sector can actually drive this. We can begin to see, I've seen situations when instances, when government actually rely on private sector for information, for data, and it's happening real time in telecommunication. And you see, this is what happened when INEC was saying, we need to do VBAs, we need to settle. Today, INEC is relying on telecommunication to actually conduct election in certain places, to provide them data, to tell them the number of people around that place also, because this information is more reliable than what government can generate. Remember when they needed to say, can election go digital? They had to say, we will invite telecommunication company to come and tell the Senate, even though I don't know the relevance of that. But it shows that government is realizing that they can't handle this process. So I don't want to be here narrating the problem, but I think each place we find ourselves, we should find a way to be thinking on how do we contribute to solving this. But currently, as a continent, I don't think we are getting it right. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your
And please,
time.
I think I just need to say I'll have to exit this platform now. My class has been ongoing for almost 2 hours. I needed to just escape from class to come here. So I look forward to seeing every other person. I'm very sorry for exiting before the time. Mr. Gabriel Udo, it's been a very nice time having conversation alongside you. I mean, every other person on this call, I am essentially grateful to everyone. I think we can meet on LinkedIn or meet elsewhere. So thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So I'll be taking the next question. It says, how do we narrow AI bias in our local communities?
Okay, so I'm trying to understand whether the word narrow would mean reduce or would mean to eliminate. Okay, because narrow would mean, from the conversations, it would mean trying to reduce it in our very local communities. First of all, it's there has to be a diverse we need to understand the issue of diversity in producing AI systems. Because most times, especially in local communities, there are technologies that are not essentially harmful when used in more in places where there is more understanding, more education as to how the systems work. So first of all, there has to be a level of diversity in the use of artificial intelligence. Before you use particular systems in particular places, you need to understand the structure, the social structure, or the individual ideologies in that place. I take Twitter, for instance. This was mentioned earlier. There's this language problem we have in Twitter, right? There are some words in Hausa, for example. If you want to use some bad words on Twitter and you don't want to be flagged, just say it in Hausa or say it in Yoruba. Nobody cares. Or you say the same thing in my local dialect. I've lived in this country for about 4 years. I have only found one person that has spoken my local dialect. So, I mean, just imagine that these communities, so to speak, are completely excluded from the training data of these big systems. So if there is no diversity in the system, if a local community feels that their interests have not been represented in how a system, an AI system, is being built, I think you should have the right to refuse. An example is when Nigeria banned the use of Twitter. They were apart from the political considerations that we all just looked at, there were so many other issues at the back end that I somewhat felt at some point this was even to our own for our own good, as the other political inclinations that we know. But there were positive outcomes to that. There are certain things that should be noted. When a community feels it's been excluded from the way a system was trained, if you build a car, for instance, there are some cars. I see people drive some funny cars in Lagos, and I'm wondering what roads are they driving those cars on? That's the first question. Before you buy these cars, you have to look at the roads, you have to look at the place, the community. You want to buy a long truck. The buses we have here are like, I'm not sure we could drive them on Nigerian roads because they are very long. If they get to the usual Nigerian roundabouts, they won't be able to turn, right? So you need to understand before you bring in, if you are in the local community, before you bring in a technology to be used, look at the social structure of that community. Is this something that should be used here? And this goes as far as even very simple technologies. Even conversations about certain technologies should not be allowed in certain communities, right? That's one. Secondly, from the guys at the top, I think it's very important to involve people from local communities in the conversations on AI. Now, this is one thing. People sit down, we say we have one representative. I don't know who's representing me at the Nigerian Senate, to be very sincere to you. But the decisions they are going to take there is affecting me, whether I like it or not. So people have to get involved. Those guys up there have to come home, involve the people in actual conversations. What do you need? What problems do you have? What AI can solve this? What will be the impact, negative and positive impact of this AI? I give an example. Some time ago, I had, I think I had this also, I wrote this on LinkedIn at some point. A community that is basically farmers, right? And these farmers live on farming. They go to people's farms, work, and they make money. That's their survival. And then you introduce, a company comes to that community with mechanized farming systems. Beautiful. You're going to make, increase the pace of farming. You're going to make it. But then what happens to the people that have spent their whole lives learning how to be farmers, and that's all they know to do? They are going to lose their jobs, right? So, but if you take a tractor to Lagos or a mechanized farming system to Lagos or somewhere that is just a river area, it's not going to have any effect. Those guys, maybe they are fishermen, maybe they are businessmen. What you're doing is not a problem. So that means a particular technology can be very useful for a particular system. But when you take it to another system, it has another effect. And Nigeria is very diverse. So there has to be involvement in conversations at the very top level. We have to get people from the very local communities, people that cannot speak English, bring them up and ask them, we want to use this technology in your community. Explain to them this idea of we have a black box. It shouldn't be there. We can't have a black box with artificial intelligence. People need to understand what is being used for on them or against them. So these are the major. And there are so many other ways that would go into policy making and all that, but these are the basic ones that we can think of at them.
Thank you so much, sir, for that. The next question says, what opportunities are there in AI for mentees?
Oh, there are many opportunities. It's like, especially for those that are lawyers, you would hear that thing that a lawyer can do anything, right? There are too many opportunities. First, if you choose not to even get into the tech aspect, there are areas like AI ethics. There are courses on AI governance and policy. There are specialist areas that, especially in AI governance and policy, 90%, I think, roughly, of the people that I know in that field are lawyers or they have a law background. So that's for those that are lawyers. There are several areas. You could look at the implications of these technologies. You could go into ethics, you could go into philosophy. There are many. There are also areas in research. You can choose to get into research, spot a particular idea. If you're in research like myself, spot a particular idea, people spot ideas, get funding for it, spend years working on that. By the time you're done with that, there are new problems. Of course, AI keeps coming up with new issues. Before you're done fixing this, it comes up with something else. And then there are also, for those who are not lawyers, there are also implications of AI in different systems. You could get into these systems like in health. A doctor can decide to look at the implications. What kind of technologies can be used in health? What will be the implications? That's especially for research. And in reality, I think in Nigeria, we still have a very, what should I call it? We have a very virgin background for AI, because at the moment, we don't have a lot of professionals. As far as I know, we don't have a lot of professionals, especially in the social sciences. We have the guys, the tech world that just build systems, and sincerely, most of them don't really understand the socio-technical implications of the systems they build. So you can decide. I've seen, I think I know one or two law firms that said they just specialize in this area, some in cybersecurity. You just build your career on that. You can get into practice, only take cases on AI. Like I know friends in law firms that only deal with IP cases, right? So you could also, if you choose to go into practice, you can get into specialization. And believe me, it's a lot of work. So it's not like it's not going to be there. It's going to come there. It encompasses even things as minor as data protection, data security. It's going to be so wide. So now that the doors are we're still trying to open the door. The advantage you have is that you have the idea ahead of time. You could practically decide what you want to do with AI research. You could basically say, I want to get into the area that deals with data protection, and your practice towards that direction. For research, you could work in companies, you could work in AI advisory boards in companies. There are companies that have that now. I think in the US, there are certain requirements that some AI companies must have some of these boards to advise them on the implications of the technology that they produce and they roll out into them. So there are many open doors now. In Nigeria, it doesn't look like there is a lot, but the absence of enough information makes it more open, even to those that do not really have a lot of information at the moment. There's a lot to learn, and
Thank you so much, sir. I hope our mentees have taken note of that. I'll take the last questions. We don't want to take so much of your time, sir. Are there any established special tech-focused courts or tribunals anywhere in the world?
At the moment, I can't think of any. What is closest to that is in the EU. There's this proposal on having a European artificial intelligence board. But it's just going to be a board. It's not like it's a specialized court. It's just more like a board that they deal with issues of regulations, AI breaches, and all that. What we have that's usually closest is there are specialized IP courts. I think I know there are some countries with specialized IP courts. There are also agencies, government agencies in some places that deal with issues on AI, and most of them really just deal with data protection. That's where you'll see like some months ago, Italy banned ChatGPT. The problem was the data. It wasn't with the automation of the system, it was with data. So they have these data protection boards or data protection agencies in many countries. These are the things that we have now, but really I'm not sure, I can't think of any at the moment, the specialized court per se that deals with AI issues.
Thank you so much, sir. It's been an interesting session today. I really enjoyed today's session. Thank you so much, sir, for always being there for us to count on. Always being around. Thank you, sir. To our presenters and our group members, you did a wonderful job. The presentations were on point. Thank you so much. We learned so much from that. This is 2:00, so I'll be leaving everybody to go enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much and enjoy. I wish everybody a blessed weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.